Hey everybody. Decided I was gonna maybe do a kind of possibly a video series. Where's the camera? I'm doing this on my iPhone. I usually do these on my tablets, but I'm gonna try it on my iPhone this time. Yeah, okay. Anyway, Cannabis, A History by Martin Booth. May he rest in peace now. Copyright, I don't know. I've had this for a few years. Trying to find it. Here we go. 2004. Okay, so he wrote this in 2004. And he passed away a few years after he wrote this. So I was thinking, I'm just going to read the first chapter to you. And this has quite a few chapters in it. But it's one of the best compendiums and, well-researched, well-written, that's been, to date, as far as I know. And so I'm just going to start off and see where we go. Once upon a time, I'll do it like this. Once upon a time, according to a story recounted by the Islamic chronicler al-Makrizi, 1364 to 1442 AD. In AD 1155, the founder of the Persian Sufi Haidari sect, Haidar, left his cell in a monastery in the mountains near Naishor, in the Khorasan region of northeastern Iran, and went out for a walk. Discovering a plant standing unwithered by the blazing sun, he grew curious and wondered how it withstood the desiccating heat. So he cut a few leaves and chewed on them as he went on his way. Usually a taciturn man, he returned in a fickle frame of mind with a smile on his face. Swearing his fellow monks to secrecy, he told them what he had discovered. Thereafter, it is said, he remained in a capricious mood until his death 66 years later. What he had purportedly discovered was a drug from a common plant. The plant was cannabis. Cannabis is the generic name for hemp, and an adaptive and highly successful annual found growing throughout the temperate and tropical zones in the world. Its classification was, for a long while, a botanical enigma. First considered a relative to the nettle, it was then thought to be a member of the Moraceae, which includes the fig, but today it is regarded as an herbaceous plant with its own specific botanical group, the Cannabaceae, in which only cannabis and Humulus lupulus, the hop, are included. The plant received its full botanical nomenclature from Carolus Linnaeus, the Swedish father of botany, who named it Cannabis sativa in 1753. The latter specific name derived from the Latin meaning cultivated. Linnaeus' chosen generic name was not plucked from the air. He based it upon the word cannabis with a K, otherwise spelled the same, the classical Greek word for hemp, which in turn derived from the Sanskrit cana, C-A-N-A. Other languages had used similar names: Assyrian kunubu or kunapu, Slav kanopla, Hebrew kaneb, Arabic kanab, Persian quanab, Celtic quanab, and Spanish Kanyamo. It has been suggested the name may have come from the Assyrian kunabu, meaning noise. It was thought the Assyrians used cannabis as an incense in religious ceremonies and were quite vocal after inhaling it. On the other hand, Kan, K-A-N, or can, which was common to many ancient languages and referred to both hemp and cane, might be a more apt derivation. That said, the third syllable, bis, B-I-S, more than likely comes from the Hebrew bosom, B-O-S-M, or the Aramaic buzma, B-U-S-M-A, meaning aromatic. Cannabis, it seems, is the fragrant cane. There has been much controversy about whether there exists one species of cannabis with different varieties, derived as monotypic, or several distinct species, polytypic. In 1783, the famous French naturalist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck suggested that the hemp plant found in Europe was sufficiently different from that growing in India for them to be separate species. He reclassified them, retaining Linnaeus cannabis sativa for the European plant and naming the Indian cannabis indica after its country of origin. Then, in 1924, a Russian botanist called Janiszewski, or Janiszewski, probably, studying wild cannabis growing in the Volga River system of western Siberia and Central Asia, recognized this as a third species, which he named Cannabis ruderalis. Consequently, the polytypic side of the argument has mainly come to be accepted, although even now there still linger doubts because the cannabis plant, being very ready to botanically adapt to its environment, has been found capable of botanically adjusting itself. It has been discovered that seeds taken from, say, a European cannabis sativa plant and cultivated in India come to display some of the characteristics of the cannabis indica plant in just a few generations, and vice versa. So they take on the environs. Of the three species, Cannabis sativa is the most widespread. A gangling, open branch plant, it can grow to 6 meters in height, whereas Cannabis indica grows only to about 1 meter and is conical in shape with dense branching. Cannabis ruderalis reaches only 3/4 of a meter at best, with few, if any, branches. Where cannabis originated is unknown. Most studies imply with justification that it probably evolved in the temperate zones of Central Asia, possibly near the Irtysh River, which flows from Mongolia into the western Siberian lowlands, along the edge of the Gobi Desert, south of Lake Baikal, or the Taklamakan Desert in China's Xinjiang province, north of Tibet, where it still occurs wild wherever the earth has been disturbed by erosion or flood. On the other hand, it is also found in abundance across Central Asia, from the Altai Mountains to the Caucasus, in the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers, river systems in China, throughout the southern foothills of the Himalayas, and in the Hindu Kush. The fringe regions of such topographical locations as the Gobi and Taklamakan deserts have for thousands of years provided the perfect climate for the evolution of annuals that rely upon wind as a vehicle for pollination. If cannabis did originate here, the prevailing winds would certainly have aided its distribution to the surrounding regions. The picture is further confused, however, by the fact that cannabis was one of the first plants to be cultivated by mankind, and present-day areas of wild growth may have resulted from plants escaping from prehistoric cultivation. It's interesting. To say cannabis is versatile is to understate its resourcefulness and adaptability. It can grow at altitudes of up to 8,000 feet, has a life cycle of only 3 to 5 months, and germinates within 6 days. In a fortnight, it is well established as a seedling and can grow at a rate of 15 centimeters a day. It can. Although between 2 and 5 centimeters is the norm. Requiring very little water except during germination and early growth. It will easily grow in poor, sandy soils. To realize its maximum potential, it prefers loamy earth. As it is heliotropic, preferring direct sunlight, it does not thrive in shade but prefers open ground and is less tolerant to low temperatures. It is furthermore dioecious, which means that the plants are individually male or female. The former producing pollen, male, and the latter the seeds, female. Hermaphroditic plants are not unknown, but are rare. In many cannabis-producing areas, male plants were traditionally destroyed as it was thought that if the female plants were fertilized, they would produce an inferior intoxicant. The plant stalk is angular, hollow, branched, and covered in fine matted hairs. It can reach 5 centimeters in diameter. The leaves are distinctly palmate and serrated. The male plant is the taller and usually comes into flower approximately a month ahead of the female plant. The male flowers are small and pale green, yellow or purplish red or brown in color. They appear in dense pendulous bunches and release thick clouds of wind-dispersed pollen, after which the plant withers and dies. The female flowers, which grow tightly together to form clusters, consist of a pair of white stigmas, approximately 1 centimeter long, in an erect V, joining an ovule at the base, which contains a small green pod, formed of modified leaves called bracts and bracteoles. The flowering period usually lasts between 4 and 8 weeks, the seed taking from 10 to 35 days to mature, depending upon growing conditions. Once the female flowers have been fertilized, the plant concentrates much of its strength into seed development and tends to lose many of its leaves. The fruit is a slightly flattened oval achene, which by definition is small, dry, and contains only 1 seed. It does not open to liberate the seed, which is brownish in color and hard. Both male and female plants produce an amber-colored resin, although the latter produces a far greater amount, the female. Smelling vaguely like peppermint and found throughout the plant, with the exception of the roots and seeds, it is predominantly secreted by tiny pluricellular glandular hairs on the anthers of male stamens and the perianths of the female flowers and the leaves closest to them. It may be so prevalent as to make it appear as if the plant is covered with dew. Production of this resin continues to increase until the female plant reaches maturity, when the seeds near to ripening, it ceases abruptly. The primary function of the resin is unknown. It has been postulated that it aids in preventing the seeds from suffering high water loss due to transpiration, for the higher the ambient temperature, the more resin is produced. Indeed, in very hot climates, the cuticle can split to allow the resin to ooze down the stems. When caked on the plant, it hardens to an impermeable, water-insoluble varnish. Other theories suggest it is to protect the seeds from ultraviolet radiation or to trap pollen. The resin has another property, however. It contains a powerful intoxicant drug, which has led some observers to believe its function is to discourage birds and insect pests. This does not seem likely, for cannabis can be infected by whitefly, spider mites, cucumber beetles, and thrips. Yeah. For many centuries, cannabis has been the source of a versatile natural fiber, an oil-rich seed, and most famously, a drug with the power to affect human consciousness. Cultivated in prehistory, it may well have been amongst the first plants to be farmed or at least utilized. As with the opium poppy, it is reasonable to believe its psychoactive, mind-bending properties were discovered very early in man's agricultural development. The fiber, made from the stalks, and one of the strongest and most enduring in nature, is commonly known as hemp. Readjust a little here. Okay, where was I? So the fiber from the stalks, and one of the strongest and most enduring in nature, is commonly known as hemp. The name deriving from the Old English henep or hanep, and the Old Saxon hanap. Most commonly, it was, and still is, used in rope making, but it was also used in the manufacture of coarse cloth, hessian, twine, and paper. The method of fiber extraction begins with a process called retting. The stems are soaked in water until they partially decompose or break down through osmosis, the non-fibrous tissue falling or being stripped away. This complete, the stems are bent to separate the fibers, which can then be spun as thread or twisted into rope. Today, the word hemp is generally used as meaning cannabis grown for its fibers. However, there are other sources of hemp, including Manila hemp or abaca from the Philippines, derived from a plant in the banana genus. Sisal or sisal hemp from the sisal cactus, New Zealand hemp from the harakiki plant, Deccan hemp from a species of hibiscus, and jute, also confusingly known as Indian hemp, from the jute shrub. The real thing, however, comes from cannabis. And that's where that word, derived, and then it spread all to the other ones, I do believe. The cannabis seed contains a greenish-yellow oil, rich in unsaturated fatty acids, which in the past was used as a lamp fuel and in the manufacture of soap. Supplanted by hydrocarbons, it was then used in the making of high-quality varnish, as an emulsion in the pharmaceutical industry, and as a substitute for linseed oil in artists' oil paints. The oil content aside, it is also a foodstuff containing substantial quantities of sugars and albumin. Birds eat it in the wild, where it seems to act as a tonic for them, as do rabbits, hares, and other mammals. Where humans are concerned, crushed cannabis seed has been used as a food source during famines and shortages, such as in China during Mao Zedong's disastrous Great Leap Forward of the early 1960s, and in Europe during the Second World War. In India, it is a staple of the poor, who make bosa and mura with it. The former, consisting of cannabis seed mixed with goosegrass seed, and the latter a mixture with amaranth or rice and parched wheat. Cannabis seed is also used to flavor alcoholic drinks and, on occasion, chutney. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, ground cannabis seed is sometimes used as a baby food. Yet cannabis is most famous throughout the world as a source of a drug, and it is as a psychoactive agent that it is most used. Indeed, it is arguably more widely taken than any other drug, save tobacco, alcohol, and aspirin. I would add coffee there too, caffeine. Plants which contain psychoactive compounds are divided into two groups. One category produces psychotropic drugs, which affect the central nervous system, whilst the other provides a psychotomimetic drugs, sometimes known as hallucinogenic or psychedelic drugs, which affect the mind, altering perception. Cannabis is of the latter category. It's a psychotomimetic, they call it. But it differs from others in the group in that most hallucinogenic plant chemicals are alkaloids, but the active ingredients of cannabis are non-nitrogenous substances called cannabinoids and unique to it. Of the approximately 460 known chemical constituents of cannabis, more than 60 have the molecular structure of a cannabinoid. But the most important of these, present by up to 5% by weight, is tetrahydrocannabinol, more commonly known just as tetrahydrocannabinol or THC for short. They had the delta sign there, that's why. Anyway, it is this, perhaps in collaboration with other cannabinoids, that is the psychoactive element. In addition to THC, there occur cannabidiol and cannabidiol, so that's CBD and CBN, which appear as the resin ages. CBD has no psychoactive capability, but CBN is a mildly psychoactive chemical. Tetrahydrocannabivarin, THCV, and cannabichromine, CBC, are also important cannabinoids with others, such as cannabicyclol, CBL, being formed not by the plant itself, but by the chemical decomposition or degradation of THC or other cannabinoids. Apart from the cannabinoids, cannabis also contains 6 essential oils, at least 8 alkaloids, flavonoids, and sugars. As well as being a euphoric intoxicant, THC also works as an analgesic, muscle relaxing, antidepressant, and antiemetic agent. It can reduce epileptic fits, stimulate appetite, and dilate bronchial tissue. Why the plant produces THC is unknown, but what is certain is that cannabis grown in temperate climates, contains less THC than cannabis raised in hot ones, but a higher percentage of CBD in the temperate zones. The study of cannabinoids goes back over a century. CBN, at first thought to be the principal psychoactive agent, was identified in the 1890s. Then, in the 1930s, CBD was isolated. However, it was not until 1964, with the post-war advances in organic chemistry, that 2 Israeli chemists, Jayoni and Machulam, isolated and identified THC. Since then, studies have discovered a long list of other cannabinoids, many of which have yet to be fully investigated. And yeah, that still applies today, to this day. 3 tests exist to determine the presence of cannabis by identifying the presence of CBD. The Duquesnoy test, which has been modified a number of times since its development in the 1940s, uses vanillin, acetaldehyde or metaldehyde, methanol, and hydrochloric acid, producing a violet color if added to CBD. It is not, however, specific and shows similar results with coffee, citronella, myrrh, and orris. The furfural test, developed in the early 1940s by an American chemist, Charles C. Fulton, also identifies the presence of CBD. It is not, however, specific and shows similar results with coffee. I reread. Developed in the Fuel test, developed in the early 40s by American chemist Charles C. Fulton, also identifies the presence of CBD, but additionally shows the presence of, amongst others, cinnamon, ergot, nutmeg, and tea. Only one test, the bean test, developed about 100 years ago, is specific. The plant resin is extracted with petroleum ether, which is evaporated off to leave a residue, which is then mixed with ether, alcohol, hydrochloric acid, and potassium hydroxide. The presence of CBD is indicated by red, violet, or purple coloration. A lot of trouble just to identify something. Most of the THC and other cannabinoids in a cannabis plant is synthesized in the resin-producing glands and concentrated in the resin itself. The female containing more than the male, the highest strength being found in unfertilized flowers, or seedless, sinsemilla. The psychoactive products of cannabis are hashish, marijuana, and rarely hashish oil. The THC content of these is 5 to 10% in marijuana, up to 20% in hashish, and as high as 85% in hashish oil. Well, those are a little different now, but you get the point. Hashish is usually made from just the resin, or resin glands, of the female plant. The name, which has in the past been spelt hashish with like two E's, or hashish with a CHISCH, right? Shish. Most likely comes from the Arabic word for dry fodder or herbage. For a while, it applied to any cannabis preparation, most of them involving drying and powdering either the whole plant or the flower heads. However, hashish today is made by isolating and concentrating only the resin and resin glands. Two collection methods are used. The traditional time-consuming and labor-intensive technique found in the Indian subcontinent and Southeast Asia involves rubbing the living flowers with the hands or a leather apron or cloth. The resin sticks to the skin or surface and is then removed either by robustly rubbing the hands together or by using a strigil or similar blunt blade. The process has given rise to one of the many romantic stories to append themselves to cannabis. In the 19th century, it was said the resin was collected by people running naked through the cannabis plantations, their bodies becoming caked with it. The story was false, told to gullible Europeans by whom any exotic story was believed. Once collected, the resin is compressed by hand or simple press into malleable blocks which quickly blacken as they are exposed to air. The alternative process is sieving. In this, the resin is collected from harvested and dried plants. Sieves used to separate plant tissue from powdered resin, which is then compressed and gently heated. The resin melts and, whilst elastic, is pressed into blocks and sealed with cloth or cellophane. Sieving is less labor-intensive than rubbing. Less material is lost in the process, and a higher purity and quality control is possible. Up to 25 grams of resin can be collected per day per person by rubbing, but sieving can produce a kilogram in 2 hours and is therefore more likely to be used for commercial produce. Furthermore, hand-rubbed hashish only retains its potency for a few months, whilst sieved hashish, being of higher purity, can last 3 years if stored at a low temperature, wrapped to exclude air and maintained away from bright light. Regardless of how it is made, hashish variety varies widely in color, form, and consistency depending on its origins. The resin may be shaped into blocks, round cakes, like ice hockey pucks, sticks or bars. It may be soft and pliable or hard and dry, powdery or brittle, and can vary in color from a light golden yellow, like rich honey, or to dark brown, red brown, or black. In its purest form, hashish consists of only the resin glands and the resin, but In practice, impurities are rarely absent. I mean, we're talking old school here. There's new oil, there's new extraction methods, concentration methods with the oils out now. This was from 2004, so and we're talking about history. We're talking about 100 years ago and, back. So, just, yeah. Anyway. Less psychoactively potent than hashish, but nevertheless very effective as a drug, are the dried cannabis leaves and flowers, commonly known as marijuana, sometimes spelt marijuana or rarely marijuano. The whole plant, except the root, is simply dried and crushed or crumbled, then either stored loose, compressed into bricks, or in bulk bound into bales. Marijuana without a flower content is less powerful. However, marijuana made only with the flowering tops of the plant is considered of top quality as a drug and is called sinsemilla. Seedless, too. In the production of sinsemilla, the word comes from the Spanish sin semillas, meaning seedless, which is centuries old. All the male plants in a crop are destroyed as soon as they appear, thus preventing fertilization and the production of seeds. The female plants then continue to produce resin and flowers in large quantities for up to 9 months. The flower heads become huge and cone-shaped, often leaning over under their own weight, when they are referred to as colas, tails. Judicious and expert pruning increases the number of colas forming. A watch is kept for any hermaphroditic plants, and the male flowers quickly pricked out. If by chance a sinsemilla plant does become fertilized, its seeds are carefully conserved for planting the following season. To achieve a psychoactive response from hashish or marijuana, THC must enter the bloodstream and pass through it to the brain. Once in the blood system, it is chemically changed by human metabolism into a compound known as 11-hydroxy-THC, which is absorbed by fatty tissue and, after about half an hour, is released back into the blood and taken to the brain. A dosage of 4 to 8 milligrams of THC will result in a 3-hour-long intoxication. Excessive use of cannabis can cause large amounts of 11-hydroxy-THC to become stored in the liver. The 2 ways of imbibing THC are by smoking or by ingestion. The former preferred because inhaled THC is absorbed rapidly through the lungs. The resulting effect is comparatively light and cerebral, lasts only a relatively short while, and has fewer side effects. When eaten, THC can take up to an hour to become absorbed into the bloodstream. The psychoactive effect, however, lasts longer and induces far more intense reactions. It follows, therefore, that smokers are in more immediate control than eaters. I prefer smoking it myself. If the effects are adverse, smokers can quickly halt them, whilst eaters cannot. This can be quite serious when one considers that hashish is up to 3 times more potent when eaten than smoked. The cause for this lies in the fact that, although at 200 degrees centigrade, cannabidiol, CBD, is converted into at least 5 different types of THC not found in the actual plant. Between 50 and 90% of the active ingredient is decomposed or oxidized by being burnt. When smoked, the effects of the THC take longer to be felt with marijuana than the more concentrated hashish. The maximum effect is experienced in about an hour. The brain does not attain such a high level of THC as other organs, such as the liver, kidneys, lungs, and spleen. At least half of the THC is excreted from the body within 24 hours, but traces may remain for some days. Despite the potential effects of eating THC, hashish and marijuana have been incorporated into the cuisine of many countries, in some cases for centuries. As cannabinoids are insoluble in water, they are usually dissolved into fat, clarified butter, ghee, or vegetable oil being commonly used in confectionery, most often associated with Middle Eastern and Oriental cuisine. The commonest sweetmeat is majun, or majun, which consists of small pellets of hashish, honey, and assorted spices. Another, manzool, is made of hashish mixed with spices, cocoa butter, sesame oil, and chocolate, whilst in North Africa, hashish is occasionally added to Turkish delight and stuffed dates. When marijuana is used in recipes, it is usually as the basis for a tea-like drink called bang, or added to homemade sweets, biscuits, and cakes. In Cambodia, dried cannabis plants are often sold as an essential ingredient in the traditional spicy soups, whilst in Thailand, cannabis is frequently added to curried dishes. Cannabis products are smoked either through a pipe or in the form of a cigarette. The pipes come in a vast array of sizes and forms, but often have long stems or incorporate a hookah-type water filtration system, in which case they are often known as a bong, to reduce the harshness and temperature of the smoke, which can scald the throat. Cigarettes are by far the more common, convenient, and popular method. Hashish or marijuana is crumbled into self-rolled cigarettes or added to tobacco, which gives it a ready burn. Hashish or marijuana on its own does not readily stay alight, but whatever. The commercial tobacco, which contains persistent combustion additives such as saltpeter, overcomes this problem. And yes, in many parts of the world, they mix tobacco with pot, but not everywhere, not all the time. Anyway, as the cigarette is smoked, the THC vaporizes and tends to become increasingly distilled down its length. The butt end, therefore, may come to contain a concentration of THC. In fact, THC vaporizes at a lower temperature than it burns. So there's no reason why cannabis cannot be smoked in vapor form. Yeah, it is. Now, being brought to vaporization temperature without being combusted. That's what vaporization means. Indeed, a vaporization method does not exist using an apparatus that passes very hot air steam over it. That does exist, sorry. The vapors are not only purer and less toxic than smoke, but also cooler and more highly psychoactive because none of the THC content has been burned off. This is a little bit arguable, okay? Just take it with a grain of salt. As with most drugs, that part, anyway. As with most drugs, cannabis has given birth to its own jargon spoken by those who use it. The colloquial names given to cannabis, hashish, and especially marijuana are legion. In English, they were or are variously known as, here we go, grass, hash, weed, pot, dope, skank, skunk, wacky backy, cake, dank, or diggity dank if the quality is high, muggles, gauge, Buddha, King Bud, Mary Jane, Chiba, Stuff, Smoke, Spinach, Mr. Alexander, or Mr. A, and tea. Some names, such as ganja, Jamaican but derived from the Hindi, and kif, Arabic, have moved over into more general usage. A hand-rolled marijuana cigarette is known as a joint. Reefer, spliff, doobie, blunt, which uses cigar leaf, right? Bomber, J, Hooter, and Jive. To score is to purchase marijuana or hashish. A toke is a single puff of smoke, whilst to hit it is to inhale. A roach is a joint butt. A high, a trip, or a buzz is the psychoactive effect of the drug on the brain. And to be stoned is to be under the influence. Throwed, wasted, or lambasted means to be very stoned. A dope or pot head is a regular user. A head shop is a store that sells cannabis users' equipment. A stash is a personal supply. A narc, or pot cop, is a drug law enforcement officer. Much of the slang originated in America. Some, such as muggles and jive, dating back to the jazz era of the Roaring Twenties. Arguably, the most common name in use is pot, applied specifically to marijuana and in use since at least as far back as 1938. It is said to derive either from the Mexican, Indian, Spanish word potiguaya, which is itself a slang word for marijuana, or from an association with the Arabic kif, literally meaning pleasure. Kif is a colloquialism used in Northwest Africa for cannabis preparations, more specifically a finely chopped stimulant mixture of dark tobacco and powdered cannabis. One observer, John Roseveare, in his book Pot, a Handbook of Marijuana, suggests that elderly Moroccan men who sat about all day smoking their pipes kept their kif in small jars or pots, giving rise to the expression, "Let him have his pipe in pot," hence the name. The name weed arose because in many places, cannabis is just that, a weed that grows wild on any vacant ground. Dope was first used derogatorily by teachers and anti-drug activists, but it gained common parlance in the 1960s hippie years, and after being at first used satirically, became a standard name. Sorry, that was getting long, but this is just the first chapter, folks. Isn't that crazy? Today, marijuana and hashish are the commonly seen and used forms of cannabis, but there exists another, hashish or cannabis oil. And yeah, much more now, prevalent now. It is a liquid concentrate chemically extracted from cannabis resin with solvents such as acetone or petrol. But, no, you don't have to do that. You shouldn't do that. With an exceptionally high THC content and known as smash, it first appeared in the USA in the late 60s. Having been, it was thought, produced in Vietnam by U.S. soldiers. It's been around a while, folks, just not in the same name or same form. It was smoked using a glass pipe in which it was vaporized over a low flame, or smeared on cigarette rolling paper, or impregnated into tobacco. Today, even in countries such as the Netherlands, where a permissive attitude towards cannabis prevails, hashish oil is illegal and classed as a dangerous drug. This is not dependent so much upon the THC content, but on the byproducts of the solvent extraction process, which can be very harmful. And yeah, shows this book's date. It's dated because now that's all irrelevant. It's out of date. We got clean ways to do it now. It's all clean, and you don't have to use all these crazy caustic chemicals to do it anymore. Right. This is from 2004, and he's talking about in the past, right? Remember that. Okay. Considered pharmacologically, cannabis is a mild hallucinogen, which in low doses produces a sense of euphoria, but with high dosage gives a more powerful reaction in which ordinary perception is reconfigured. THC affects specific areas of the brain. It acts upon the cerebellum, which coordinates movement and balance. The hippocampus, in which linear thinking and memory occur, and the rostral ventromedial medulla, where pain response is modulated. In 1992, it was discovered that just as the brain produces opiate-like substances called endorphins, so does it also manufacture a cannabinoid-like chemical called anandamide, also found in cocoa beans and red wine, which is thought to play a part in controlling pain and sleep patterns and to be a neurotransmitter for pleasurable sensation. Research has shown that THC locks on to the same cell receptor, a protein found predominantly on cells in the hippocampus and cerebral cortex, as does anandamide, and that a lack of or reduction of it causes neurological disorders, and possibly illnesses, such as multiple sclerosis. You can have a lack of the naturally occurring body secreted version called anandamide. Yeah, interesting. There are researchers who use the fact that the human brain contains specific cannabis receptors to contend that clearly nature intended humans to use the plant. Those who disagree are of a mind that cannabis somehow hijacks the human brain, and that when THC locks on to the receptors, it is doing so much as a magpie might grab a shiny piece of jewelry left in a window, not because it either wants it or needs it or can gain value from possessing it, but merely because it is there. Going free, so to speak. Neither argument is as yet proven or disproven. There needing to be much research to discover truth. Okay, now that paragraph was... there's much more evidence to support the first part of that paragraph. Now, yeah. Nature intended it, okay? Anyway, that's just how it is. The effects of marijuana depend not only upon the individual user's body chemistry, but also upon their mood, expectations, situation, and personality. Some do not enjoy it, whilst others remain unaffected by it. It does affect people. Everybody's different. Okay. Hashish, on the other hand, being much stronger, invariably exerts an influence. Dosage is crucial, although with no standard quality control existing, the ideal dose can rarely be determined by the user. Primary psychoactive effects are pleasurable feelings of elation and well-being, a loss of inhibition, and an altered sense of time, often indicated by feelings of déjà vu. Imagination increases, but levels of concentration are known to be reduced. Behavior may become compulsive, but very rarely indeed is it violent or aggressive. Visual sensitivity increases. Patterns may appear with enhanced peripheral vision and raised visual imagery. Touch, taste, smell, and hearing are augmented, while some users report receiving the paranormal phenomenon of telepathy and empathy. Yeah, I agree with that one. Very important. Hell. All right, I'm going to end it there because there's still a good few pages in this chapter, folks. So I'll mark where we are, and I'll start another video to finish the chapter. Okay. Stay tuned for part 2. Hope you've listened and learned, and it's made you more curious and more interested in the cannabis plant and all the world around it. It's really something. It's been present and powerfully felt in humanity and civilization since the beginning. And it may even be one of the original primal causes of civilization as we know it and what that means to us. And how we socialize together. And it's very innate in us. And that's why it's such a tragedy that something so wonderful, natural, and part of our history and part of who we are is a collective civilization. It's an ongoing and up and down roller coaster civilization. How it's been such a positive, and how unfortunate that it's been in more recent times been demonized and vilified and been used as a scapegoat and an excuse for people's misdeeds and issues that have nothing to do with our wonderful plant. So, hope y'all like that. I'll start right where we were on part 2. Have a good night.